branch is dry, so we're doing well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add water in. Since it's such a large branch, we're going to go right down to here, and then we'll go on, because I don't want this all wet while I'm working up here. So we're just going to put water in up there. I think we're just going to do one glaze of water as well. Because it's not that large an area. You don't want it to overwhelm. Now, the color we just put in for these is going to be our light value on this branch, and then we'll darken it as we go. And come right down to this little lump here. Now, you always want to put in a little bit of extra water just because you don't want it to harden into a flat, straight line. Watercolors are always supposed to be soft, or I think they look better when they're soft. Add something in there, so I got that out of there. So it looks good. And again, since we're only going to do one coat, I'm going to lay that down. Now I'm going to go up a size, just simply because this is the larger area. So I'm on a Billy Shoal 6, and don't forget the European brands are, the 6 is probably our 8 in America. Okay, or at least in this brand it is. So this is going to be our lightest value. As you can see, this is a pretty dark in comparison. It's going to have a lot more detail branch than the other ones were, so definitely want to make that distinction. This is coming forward because he's sitting on it, and of course he's our center of interest. Since this is going to go this way, I'm going to start applying it that way too. And making sure I'm getting to the edge on most of it. Some of it can be a highlight if you don't get right to the edge, which is a good thing to know too, right? So we're going to come right to here. Okay, now I want to darken that. So to darken it, I'm going to take my mixing, add in more of the neutral tint, which is going to blue it a little bit, which is fine for this branch. I do want to add in, just to tone it down a little bit, the red, permanent alizarin crimson red deep, just to help tone that down. And then just a hint. It's all the same colors that we're using, it's just the values that we're creating differently. Okay, so I've got that darkened. Now this, I'm going to apply in droplets where I want it to be fairly dark, like at the base of that stem or branch coming in. I want that to be fairly dark right there. This brush holds a lot of paint, so you gotta really fill it up where you want it to be. I'm gonna bring a branch down in here as well. So here you're creating your darker value. It's kind of your mid value. Leaving some of the light in the background because that's our highlight. Now right where it comes up next to him, I want that to be darker. And we're still going to put a dark too, so I don't think you have to accomplish all your darks in one spot here, or one layer, because we're going to come back and do some dry or wet on dry paper, so right now we're just getting a little bit of a value in there. Now right in here, there is an area, kind of starts right here. It's hard to do with this having stopped right there. And then there's some of a brownish color in there. The bark is coming off, so that's, we're going to help create that with this. And I think the darker value we're going to do wet on dry. So we're going to just get this in here, see how it holds. And by that I mean, is it keeping the value that I'm laying down, or is it lightening too much? That type of thing. That's what I mean when I say hold. How it holds. Okay, so we've got some muted areas in there, which is really, really good. I'm going to clean my brush off. I'm going to dry this, and then we'll continue on down. So I'll be right back with you. Okay, I got everything nice and dry. I flipped my picture around so you can watch me do this one. I'm dropping everything. Today's just been a nightmare that way. I'm adding more water because this is going to be, the first goal is going to be our light value. So I'm going to add more water to this mixture that we have. And then we can add more dark to it as we go, as we need it. That should be good. Okay, so I was using my mixing brush so I don't ruin my good brushes. I always recommend that. So we're going to start out with our water glaze. And again, it's just going to be one glaze of water. Normally, like on the bird and so forth, we would do two. But on this branch, we're just doing one. Just it's not the largest area in the world. And I don't want it to necessarily spread real far like I would with the bird. So that's why I'm only doing one glaze. Come right up to where I painted before. And since that's dry, it should work out pretty well. There we go. Okay, I'm going to pick up my number 8 and load my brush up really well. We're just going to glaze this on. And again, if you leave some of the edges white, that goes towards highlight. So that's a good thing. Now these bumps over here are darker, so make sure that gets some of that paint in there. And again, this should be the background color, so it should be lighter, which is the way it's drying, which is a good thing. That's what we want. And those are all the things that you want to look at. That's why I mentioned them. I'm looking at that, but I'm verbalizing it at the same time, so you know what I'm looking for and why. You want to make sure your values are correct. You want to make sure that you're doing that as you paint. And for me, verbalizing it helps me remember. So, okay, now there's our light value. I'm going to take my mixing brush again and add some of the dark in there. First of all, a touch of the ultramarine. And then the neutral tint. Now at this point I'm not using black at all. We will use black for his beak area, or his face, his mask I guess is a good way to describe it. So, but at this point, no, we're not using black. So there, we've got some nice darks in there. And I'm going to just load my brush. I always like to twirl it so I come to a point. And here again, we're going to just drop this in. It does appear that the top is darker course, I'm looking at it upside down, but the top is darker on this branch down here, so we're going to make sure we get some of that. We do want to get some across though. Now these little areas are darker. Make sure that both sides get that dark. And that's good because that's about the way a branch is. So back and forth. Rounded edges. Because it is a cube. It's not a cube. It's a cylinder. I'm sorry. It's a cylinder. Cube just came to mind there for some reason. And so it's just a long round cylinder. Okay, now I'm going to soften that in a little bit better so it doesn't look real strange right there where it blends in. Okay, cool. I'm going to let this dry. Well, I'm actually going to dry it, and then we'll come back and do some more detail on that. So I'll be right back with you. Okay, got the big branch with the wet on wet in there. Move it up so you can see the whole branch. Okay, so now I'm gonna go down to a number 2 brush. Don't really think we're gonna need a liner. This number 2 that I have is just got a phenomenal tip on it, so I like to use it. Now this is where we're going to incorporate the black, and so you want to really follow your picture. I'm going to go right over my eye because I do have the highlights in there. I'm going to do just a tip on his beak, and then I keep wanting to call it a nose. We're going to go right over that eye and just make this look a little feathery. Now when we go back in and do our next layer of dry on wet, or wet on dry, and then we'll darken the back of that beak so that beak comes forward and put in some of those darker feathers. So I'm just going to pick up some of that black. I don't think I need to mix anything. Now anytime you're using black, you want to be overly cautious because it's black. It's dark. It's going to be very hard to get rid of. And if we have to do 2 layers of this, I don't care. Rather that than to try to get that black out of there. Now I've got moisture on my ferrule, so I'm removing that as we go. So I do have my lines back in here. I hope you took advantage of doing that as well. Just creating little feathers as we go. See, that's pretty dark even with a lot of water in there. So black is black. See what a nice little tip I have on here, and it's a number 2, so really didn't feel I needed a liner. And I always feel with a liner I'm just loading it and loading it and loading it all the time, and sometimes that's just not good. Alright. You want to do a few little feathers in here, and then I'm going to come down to the other eye. Now even though that masking fluid is in there, you want to be sure and go over that eye because you don't want to miss a spot when you take the masking fluid off and see that you had a spot missing there. Now I can see, I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera, but I can see the value change from this side to this side. I had a lot more water in my brush on this side, so I'm just going to go over it with it a little bit darker, just to make sure it gets as dark as the other side. Do a couple little feathers. This side could actually be a little bit thicker. Now he's starting to take shape, isn't he? Alright, now there is a black area right on the tip of his beak. And up just a little bit like that on the side. Okay, now I'm going to go back over to that side. Now when I'm doing something like this, I always follow the photograph really closely, because this is what's going to give this little guy characters right here, what we're doing. And that's where the photograph comes in handy. Side still needs to be a little thicker up here. That's better. Now I went down and I made that little mark there because I'm telling myself that's where that is, okay? Just so you can kind of tell your little brain where you want to stop with this edge. But it does come over here like this. Now this inside edge seems to be pretty straight. There doesn't seem to be a lot of feather marks. So I'm going to do the same thing. Okay. And he comes down like this here. And it tells me where I need to go. Keep running out of paint. I'm just using the tip, that's why. So even when I'm loading, I'm just using the tip. Put in a few of those little feather marks. Making sure he's nice and dark where we want him to be. Okay. I'm going to call that good. I'm going to dry that because it is so dark and I do not want to smear it.